So, Berto, there's a new Star Trek movie coming out soon.
Whoop!
It's the third of the reboot series.
Is it already the third?
Yeah. Have you seen the other ones?
I have, yes.
Do you like them?
Yeah.
I love them. The first one that came out, the J.J. Abrams, the first one, I was blown away.
It was really fun.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of skepticism, I think, going into it.
Yeah.
But I liked it. I also didn't have as much writing on it, like compared to Star Wars, for example.
Yeah.
Meaning I didn't have a lot of holy cows that they couldn't sacrifice. But even that, I did like the story, the action, the characters. They seems like the casting was great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the story was great. I guess it's similar to the J.J. Abrams Star Wars reboot. Not reboot, but new installment in that he's a nerd boy and a fanboy, and he stayed true to the original essence while updating it for modern audiences in this, I think, very well designed integration. Plus lots of lens flares. You can never go wrong with too many lens flares. So today I want to talk about the psychology of Star Trek and hear what you have to say. I grew up with Star Trek, so I consider myself both a Star Wars fan and a Trekkie. I'm one of those rare individuals that...
Did you watch all the series, all the different spin-offs and things?
Well, we can get into that in a second, but this is the Psychology in Seattle podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kirk Honda. I am chair of the Couple and Family Therapy Program at Antioch University, Seattle, and I'm also a licensed therapist.
My name is Humberto Castañeda, and I do blind taste tests at malls.
So I watched the original series. I'm 45, so when I was a kid, there were only 3 or 4 channels. You had ABC, NBC, CBS. You had PBS, which almost had nothing on it except for Sesame Street for me, and then it had like Masterpiece Theater and a bunch of other stupid old people stuff. And then you had Channel 11, which was KCPQ, which was, I don't know what that would be now. Was it KCPQ? Anyway, it had the Channel 11 had all the reruns, I think, and it would have, like Bewitched and Hogan's Heroes, and it would also have Star Trek episodes. It just seemed like it was always on. And, it could have been good or bad. I would have watched it anyway because I was watching My Three Sons. And
there weren't a lot of options. So it's like, and TV, it's like moving pictures. Whoa.
Right. And so, we're talking 1978 at this point. And also I was super into sci-fi because it was the sci-fi explosion after Star Wars in 77.
What was the name of that one with the submarine and the little puppets? Sequest or
I don't know.
Do you know what show I'm talking about?
No.
Oh man, it had the little puppets that like the Team America style puppets.
Really?
Yeah, and they were all in this like futuristic submarine, and they would do these missions underwater. And
is this a Columbia thing?
No.
Well, you had Battlestar Galactica. You had Star Blazers, which was amazing. I, as a kid, would wake up without an alarm clock at 7 a.m. and turn over. And so backing up, I got sick as a kid. You always get sick, right? Yeah. The flu or something. And as a bonus to making me feel better, my parents let me have the extra TV. We had 2 TVs in the house. We had the living room color TV, which was probably like 17 inches, across or something.
Wow.
And then we had a 13 or a 10-inch black and white television tube, with antenna ears. And because I was sick, they let me have it in my room so I could lay in bed and watch TV. And after I became well, I just forgot to tell everyone that the extra TV was in my room. I had, 3 siblings and we had dogs and cats. And so it was pretty easy to be forgotten I was middle child too.
So you kept the TV.
I kept the TV for, I don't know how long. And I remember at 7 a.m. I would wake up, turn over, Star Blazers would be on. I just remember my brain would just go, Star Blazers is on. Boom. I'd wake up, turn on, watch a half an hour of Star Blazers, and then I'd walk to school. in the snow uphill both ways, by the way.
By the way, this is the picture of the show I'm talking about.
Oh, yeah. I've seen
Does that seem
pictures of
familiar?
that. It does look like Team America.
It does, totally.
Yeah. I've never watched the show. Space 1999. Do you remember that show?
No. What was
That was probably you're a little bit younger than me. It's probably a bit before your time, but that show was on Martin Landau, I think. And it was like a really cool show. There was a space station on the moon, I think. And then something happened, and the moon and the space station were flung into the galaxy. And it had this really cool spaceship that I got for my birthday or Christmas or something.
Oh my God. Okay, so I didn't watch that regularly, but as soon as you said Martin Landau in space, I was like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
I must have seen like an episode or two or something, because the memory instantly shot back.
Yeah, I think it was kind of like Star Trek in that it was trying to be true to what might actually happen in the future. And then Space Ghost, the cartoon.
Right.
Anyway, so yeah, I watched a lot of Star Trek and the original series. And then when Next Generation came out, I was in college. It was around in late high school, early college. And I loved that show. Just loved it. For the time, it was one of the best TV shows around. Compared to TV now, it's shit, really. Let's just be frank. I mean, there are some episodes that are great and some storylines.
Well, TV now is like amazing movies.
Right. But back then, you just have to understand that it was up against like stuff like Full House and
Right. If you
and
think about
Saved by the Bell. I mean, millions. I mean, when Saved by the Bell was on TV, 75% of homes were watching that. It wasn't an irony thing. It wasn't ironic.
No,
People actually tuned in. So Next Generation was a step above that. So therefore, it was amazing at the time. And John
imagine
Picard
like today, like a Game of Thrones episode plays, and then
Yeah.
Star Trek episode.
God, speaking of, are you up to date?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, you're up to date.
Oh yeah.
Oh, that's right. We talked about it.
Well, and then did you watch Sunday?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Oh my God.
I was dying when certain people got stabbed.
Oh my God. Well, God. Well,
Spoiler alert.
She's got to come back. I mean,
Well, yeah. I mean, she's clear. Look, if they brought back the spoiler alert, Hound.
Yeah. Right.
Certainly.
Right. And that whole thing was a little confusing. Anyway, we won't go down that road.
Yeah.
But
this turns into a Game of Thrones.
so then Deep Space Nine comes out, and I didn't have cable or even probably TV in the mid '90s, and
wait, which was that? Is that the one with number 6 or 6 of 9 or 20 of?
no,
11?
that's Voyager.
Okay.
So Deep Space Nine was in between there. That's the one with Odo and the black captain.
Okay.
And the I don't know how to describe it.
So the female captain was Voyager?
Yes, and 6 of 9, right? Was Voyager, right?
Number 6, she's a turns out she's a robot.
No, you're thinking of the other one's show. But anyway, so when that came out, I couldn't really watch it, but then later like as it was rerunning, I discovered it because, again, nothing. I didn't have cable, and it was the only thing on TV. And so I fell in love with Deep Space Nine. It's actually, out of all the series, it's my favorite.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It has, once it gets going and it finds its rhythm, it is sort of a precursor to TV now, which is each episode builds upon a much larger story.
Oh.
The Next Generation, for the most part, each episode is isolated a story.
They had recurring themes and characters, but it certainly wasn't a one overarching.
Right. Yeah. Whereas with like Battlestar Galactica or The Sopranos or Game of Thrones or really any of the great shows today,
Riptide,
you could never. That was another show I loved. I loved that show when I was a kid. Did you like that show?
Yeah, I loved it, man. With the little nerd guy, and the robot, and then in the intro they always back like the nerd guy's trying to drive, and he turns around, and instead of backing up, he goes forward with the car.
Yeah. And that helicopter.
Yeah, with like a smiley face.
Those guys were so cool.
Nick and Cody.
Oh, I don't remember. That was too long ago for me. But So yeah, Deep Space Nine was, I thought, great. And then when Voyager came out, I was like, oh great, a brand new one. And then I watched it for a little bit, and then I just lost interest. I understand it's good, and it also has an interesting storyline, but Janeway annoyed me. You know me, I'm a massive feminist, so I really wanted to, love a woman captain, but she just, do you know what I mean?
I didn't watch it.
Oh, because she has a very particular acting style.
Oh, I see.
That is stylized is the word for it.
Do you know who annoyed me for the longest time was the president in Battlestar Galactica?
Really?
Yeah.
She kind of has a particular way of acting.
Yeah. Because you know what it is? She always seems like she's got a little smile, like almost a little bit of a smile.
Yeah.
And I'm like, dude, this is not a smiling scene.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's just her face, but I'm like pissed off at her.
I liked her. But I could see.
Eventually, I grew to like her.
Yeah. And then Enterprise came out, and it was a prequel to the
what?
It was a prequel to the original series. So
there was an Enterprise.
It was a young the first captain of the Enterprise, like before Kirk.
Before Kirk.
Yeah, and it was they hadn't met the Vulcans. They hadn't met anyone yet, or they just met the Vulcans or something. Anyway, and
when was this Enterprise?
It was after Voyager.
Okay.
And, by the way, let me just say a little caveat here. If we make a random mistake about the details about Star Trek, keep it to your fucking selves. I don't want to hear it. The point of this episode is to have a silly conversation about the psychological implications of Star Trek, and for you and me, Humberto, just to randomly talk about the show. The point of the show is not to catalog the precise details of the show. So if you feel like nitpicking on a detail, fuck off and keep it to yourself. Plus, why would you listen intently to something for an hour and just to point out one tiny little thing that we got wrong? So I'm mainly upset because of the bulk of the comments on our Psychology of Harry Potter episode, which I thought was amazing and super fun to do.
It was fun to do.
The majority...
Did we get a lot of bad comments about the details?
The majority of the comments on YouTube were blasting about one tiny detail in the trivia section that someone got wrong.
What was that one?
It was like it was someone's Patronus was, someone was wrong about it. I asked you guys, I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
Literally 50 different questions.
Wasn't it like an otter and someone said a rabbit or something
like that? I don't even want to like acknowledge the bullshit that people are saying online. And I just have to say, like, look, if that's all if you listen to the show and you're entertained and, or it passes the time or whatever it gives you, and then the one thing you decide to email us about, instead of like, love the show, I thought that point was interesting. That point I didn't agree with, and here's my point about that.
Or actually, even hey, I didn't like this show. Here's a whole bunch of reasons why.
Yeah.
As opposed to like, you said the word wrong.
Yeah. I mean, again, I think the Harry Potter episode was an hour and a half, 2 hours. I don't know. It was really long. And the amount of stuff we talked about and the roads we went down. So anyway, back to Enterprise. And Enterprise came out. It had a lot of promise. I loved the first couple episodes, and then I quickly started to hate the show. And I think there's going to be another TV series coming out.
I did hear that.
Yeah. And then, of course, all the movies. I saw the original Star Trek, the first... one, the first.
Do you know I've never watched that original Star Trek movie?
You should never watch it. I mean, it's interesting. It's interesting culturally because it's of its time. It's
got Dr. Kirk in it, right?
It's from I think 80. I believe I know I went to it for my birthday party, and it must have been my 9th birthday or 8th birthday, and I went with one of my friends. And a friend you actually met before. Uh-huh. And we bought huge Hershey bars, each. My mom gave us money and just sent us in, and we watched. And we ate the entire Hershey bar before the movie started.
Yeah, you mentioned this because the line was so long, right?
No, we just were sitting, during the previews and just torqued it down.
Oh, wow!
And then we got really sick. And then anyway, but the movie they're sort of trying to be like 2001 anyway. And then 2 comes out, Wrath of Khan.
That was great.
Was amazing, and
that one had Lieutenant McAvoy, the engineer,
and totally redeemed. The future. If Wrath of Khan was terrible, I would guess that they never would have revised Star Trek ever again, because it was at that point you just had the original series, which was kind of quirky, and then you had the first movie, and that was a flop. Anyway, the point is that I've seen every movie I've seen every Star Trek movie, even 5, the one that Shatner directed. And I enjoy all of it.
Is the 5 the quest for peace?
5 is the one where they meet
country.
Is where they meet God.
That's the undiscovered country. No, that's the Final Frontier.
I don't know what it's called, but it's the one that Shatner directed, and they meet God. The theory that all the odd numbered Star Trek movies are terrible. So 1 is terrible, 2 is awesome, 3 was not so good.
The search for Spock or something?
Yeah, it has, I think, Klingons in it. 4 is one of my favorites. It's the one where they come back in time and they go to 80s San Francisco, and they have the see-through aluminum, and Spock has all these just classic
Is that the
lines.
one with the whales is...
That's whales, that's 4.
That's 4, okay.
5 is they meet God, I think, at the center of the galaxy.
I think that one's called the Final Frontier.
I don't know, and 6 was pretty good.
And that's the undiscovered country.
Yeah, okay. And then 7, I thought 7 was okay. 8 was better.
Wait, 7, the Borg,
there's like the Generations one, which I liked, and then there was First Contact, which I liked. Nemesis was pretty good. Anyway, and then they did the reboot. Anyway, the point is I want to ask you were in Columbia as a kid.
That's right.
Did you watch Star Trek there?
So you were saying how there were like 4, 5, maybe 6 channels. In Columbia, we had 3 channels. We had the channel A, we had channel B, and we had the public access channel.
Not C.
It's not C. So it was like, I think on the dial, it was, if I'm not wrong, it was 1, 2, and 11. I think that's what, Canal 1, Canal 2, y Canal 11. And the 11 was the public access. And, there's all local shows, everything in black and white and stuff like that. Or at least, actually, I don't know, because we had a black and white TV back then. So maybe it was...
So we're talking around 1980 at this point.
Yeah. Whoa, this must be what the future is like, And it felt more legit than Star Wars, even though, of course, I loved Star Wars with all my heart. I kind of knew, well, first of all, Star Wars, if it took place in the past, right? And also, well, I guess it didn't really take place, even though I'm sure I have the Force power. But Star Trek felt kind of more legit, like, oh, this is real science. I bet you NASA knows about this stuff.
Right.
And so that was
it was attempting to be a legitimate future. And what I always loved about it was they set it far in the future, far enough to make it so that it's actually possible that we could be there at that point. In the 23rd century, it seems... It's definitely possible. And this was at a time when they were making, TV shows, movies, books about 1984, in which there were just massive leaps.
Do you remember Class of 1984 with the punks in the high school beating up the teacher?
No, but there were, they would set things in the year 1999. When time travel is ubiquitous and hoverboards are everywhere. They said it in the year 2250 or something.
They covered their ass, that's for sure.
Yeah, and the reason why writers will set it just 10 years in the future is because they want to make it more relevant to you.
Right.
And Gene Roddenberry, in his intelligence, was like, we're not going to be here in 10 years. That's silly.
Right.
We have to set it this. And I'm sure people were like, well, let's set it just a little for, Space 1999, for instance.
Sure.
Let's just set a little bit. And so he's like, no, I don't know if this conversation happened, but since it's really one of the only shows that actually sets it that far, I'm guessing someone.
I'm sure someone at the network was like, come on, guys. I know the book, whatever. Come on, guys.
Yeah.
Was there a book?
No.
Or did you just write the show?
No, he just wrote it.
Okay, fine. So even more pressure, because then they didn't have a book to follow. It's like
Gene Roddenberry was a writer for TV and had written other things and had started this idea of this Star Trek or sci-fi show for a while and got it off the ground.
Well, there were two things as a kid that felt real to me that were fictional. Mm-hmm. One of them was Star Trek. The other one was The Dark Crystal, not the movie, but the book. I didn't actually see the movie for many years after, but because it just felt so well written and stuff. But so whenever I watched Star Trek, I would also get a little scared because there was always a very crisis kind of thing happening, and no one was ever like laughing and smiling. It wasn't like The Love Boat, everything. Like the episode started very, with the little sounds, like the little almost submarine pings and things, and it's like, it's the start date such and such today. I don't know if I'll live or die or something like really ominous. And then they encounter some blob in the screen, and everyone's really serious, and everyone looks to Captain Curdy, and he's like, "What am I gonna do?" With that voice that he had.
Yeah.
I'm throwing enough things for people to hate on me.
What am I going to do?
No, but seriously, and then like the interplay between, because Captain Kirk's like the
let's get into that in a second. Before we do that, I just want to wrap up a couple other little bits of my life. I had a life-size Captain Kirk on the inside of my door of my bedroom. That's one thing. I also had a couple action figures.
Oh, man. I didn't know. Like, I never saw Star Trek toys when I was a kid.
Yeah. A big memory for me as a child was really wanting the Enterprise bridge with the action figures. They
sold that?
Yeah, they had it. And I, of course, wasn't, I didn't get it because I wasn't a spoiled only child like you were. So, and I also remember at Salmon Days, we've been to Salmon Days at Issaquah. I grew up near Issaquah. So as a kid, I remember my parents dropped me off at the fire station to be with the other kids, and we watched an episode of Star Trek called The City on the Edge of Forever. And it's supposed to be like the best Star Trek episode and one of the best TV episodes of all time.
It is good.
Yeah. And I remember that very, very plainly. Okay. Trivia. So, how many seasons of the original series was there? How many seasons? What do you think?
2.
3.
3.
I'm surprised you said 2 because most people think, there must have been like 10 seasons.
I only know this because years and years later, probably like 5 years ago, I was surprised during like some trivia thing. Because I remembered it as like tons of episodes.
Right.
Yeah.
And only 79 episodes. And do you know what years they were on?
Actually 79 episodes for 3 seasons.
Yeah.
It's a lot of episodes.
Right. But I think back then that's what they did. No, they were an hour long. Wow. What years do you think it was on for? What years?
The original run?
Yeah. When did it start?
Whoa. 68 to 71.
Oh, pretty close. 66 to 69.
Okay.
Gene Roddenberry. Okay, next question. Who said "Beam me up, Scotty"? Beam me up, Scotty. Who said that?
No one.
Ooh, that's good. You know your stuff. No one ever said that on the show. That was never
uttered.
Except
Humphrey Bogart in Tampa Casino.
That's right. Where did Spock's salute come from? Where he holds up his hand like this. You can't see this in podcast land.
The little V-shaped live long and prosper.
Live long and prosper.
Where did it come from?
Where did it come from? Yeah.
Oh, what's the thing?
Yeah, where did it, it came from somewhere. And so where did it come from?
It is a Native American thing.
No, it's a Jewish thing.
Oh.
Spock is Jewish, as is Shatner. and Spock remembers this hand signal as a child. It's a signal.
Did he come up with it?
No, it's a signal. It's a hand signal for God or something. I read.
Well, what I mean is, did Spock?
Yeah, so Spock introduced
it.
Yeah, he suggested it. Yeah.
Leonard Nimoy.
Yeah, Leonard Nimoy, who recently passed away. What did the shirt colors mean? You know, you had the gold shirt, you had the red shirts.
Gold was the captain.
Okay,
And
but not just the captain, but
were there more?
Yeah, well, what's the broader
executive? Oh no, because Spock had a blue.
Yeah.
Okay, so like the I think McCoy and Spock had blue.
Yeah.
Scotty had
he had red.
Red, yeah.
Yeah.
And Uhura had like that little dress. I think it was a blue dress, a little short, little skirt.
Was it blue or red? I think it was red.
Was it always red?
Yeah, she was red.
Okay.
Anyway, it's command. Gold is command. And
okay.
which for some reason includes, the captain, of course, but also includes navigation and weaponry.
Oh, interesting.
So that I never knew that.
So there were other gold shirts in the show?
Yeah.
I didn't remember that.
And red is operations, which is engineering, security.
And death.
Well, security, yeah, ship services and communications. Blue is all the sciences.
I see.
Which is interesting. That's interesting
cool.
that you'd have a color just for the sciences, which is, again, tells you of Gene Roddenberry's emphasis on science in the show. What actor or actress was having an affair with Gene Roddenberry when he created the show? Which actress or actor?
William Shatner.
Nope. Take another guess.
Well, I don't know the names of the females.
Well, any of the characters.
Oh, okay. Uhura.
Yep.
Really?
Yep.
What?
And any other? And he was actually having an affair with another woman. Who do you think that was? On the show.
Shut up.
No. I'm not gonna shut up. It's my show. You can't make me.
I don't know. I don't know any other.
Nurse Chapel.
Nurse Racket.
Nurse Chapel. So Uhura, Nichelle Nichols, and Majel Barrett.
So little Gene was rotting his berries.
With two women while he was married, by the way, and he wrote those characters for these two mistresses.
Well, takes all kinds.
Yeah. Which actor lived near Seattle after the show?
Oh, I know this.
I actually saw him in Bell Square one time.
I know this.
And I was like, oh my God, it's blah, blah, blah.
Scotty.
Yep, you're right. James Doohan, he lived in Redmond. He died in 2005, and some of his ashes were flown into space.
Wow.
Which of the original three characters wore high heel shoes to appear taller? Which of the three main characters on the original series wore high heel shoes to appear taller?
McCoy?
Nope, Shatner. What famous civil rights activist praised the show for something I'll tell you in a second? What famous civil rights activist praised the show? Who do you think?
I mean, MLK?
Yep, MLK. He told Uhura, Nichelle Nichols, how important it was for her to keep playing the role since it was so rare to see a positive portrayal of a black character on television.
Did he know that she was on because she was an affair?
No. But he might have been cool with that because he was
token black.
Well, he was MLK was prone to
engineer to
his own.
Oh, was he?
Oh, yeah.
Whoa, we're just defaming all sorts of famous people.
Yeah, MLK had affairs.
So did Einstein. So
yeah. What actor lost his or her middle finger in World War II? What actor lost their middle finger in World War II?
Middle finger. Well, it must be Spock.
Nope, it's James Doohan, Scotty. He lost his right middle finger during World War II, and most of the scenes are shot to hide that fact. I think they should have written that in, like in the first episode.
Right.
He should have had a prosthetic, and then a Klingon bites it off, and then for the rest of the time he always
that would have been epic.
Yeah.
But I thought it was Spock because we always thought he was doing a little weird hand signal.
Yeah.
Instead, he was missing his middle finger.
He was just trying to high five you.
Yeah.
And you're misinterpreting it. Whose appearance was modeled after the Beatles? Which character was modeled after the Beatles?
Chekhov.
Yep. They actually brought him on the show later on because the management was like, you got to appeal to kids. And it's also rumored that Roddenberry heard that Russians were angry that there was no Russian person.
Oh, and by the way, isn't it funny how whenever back then they were trying to introduce a Beatles element into a thing, it was only that narrow time of their first rise where they had the little mop tops.
Right.
Because they didn't before, they didn't after.
Yeah.
It was like a year of mop tops.
Yeah.
And then from there on, it was like, if you wanted to emulate Beatles or do a Beatles-like thing, mop top.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Chekhov was brought on in 1967. By then
they were way past
the mop tops, right? Why did Kirk's uniform become green later in the show? Why did it become?
Because he got promoted to admiral.
No. It also, I don't know. Have you seen his different uniforms?
I mean, I remember him having different shirts.
Yeah. Do you know
did he
why?
get fat?
Yeah.
And the green would hide it?
Yes.
No way.
Yeah. So
Is green slimming?
Well, the green one that he had it had this like wraparound thing. It was almost like a robe.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
And it was designed, and I think he wore a girdle a lot too.
Oh wow.
What was the nickname Bones short for? What's Bones short for? It's actually used in the real world. So what's it short for?
Well, I thought it was related to like the war and like surgery and stuff like that.
Yeah, what's it short for though? What do you think?
Cutting my bones.
Close.
A bone cutter.
Sawbones.
Sawbones. Okay.
So there were apparently Navy doctors that were nicknamed Sawbones because they sawed a lot of bones. All right. So let's get into analyzing Star Trek here. Star Trek is very much known for how much it was a morality storyline, or the story. The episodes were very much comments on morality.
Yeah, there were always these impossible choices.
Yeah,
and it's like, do we kill off this species or save this planet?
Yeah.
Right.
Now, what do you think? Do you think there was less racism? Do you think it furthered our, civil rights movement at the time? What do you think?
I have to feel like at least subconsciously it must have had some effect, because like the dialogue in the show and the core thrust of it was, look, in the future, look at all these people intermixed in the same vessel and encountering aliens. And instead of just destroying everyone they see, they try to do things in a more civil manner. And I just think that it would have had to have an effect, at least in the younger generation.
Right. At the time, in the 60s,
Positive.
The situation in the United States was such that we were mortal enemies of the Ruskies, and there was a Russian on the ship. We just got out of a massively horrible war with Japan, and Sulu was right there on the ship. We had a black woman as an officer on the bridge.
That's right.
We had all sorts of things like that, and so sexism and racism were both addressed.
As long as the white male was still in charge.
Right. So that's the important thing, is we still have white, aside from Spock, which you can't really, but he's kind of in my view, he's kind of a version of a white person. But at the very least, you have a lot of Kirk and a lot of Bones, in the show.
I always thought Spock, as a kid, I thought he was an elf.
An elf?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, he did have pointy ears. So there was less racism and less sexism, but there was still racism and still sexism.
There was still a stratification.
Yeah.
But certainly advanced
Right.
for its time.
Right. The thing that I think of sometimes when I think of stuff like this is, at the time of the founding of the United States, only 5% of the people who live, of the people who lived in the United States, the 13 colonies, could actually vote.
Yeah.
But and you just think, it's like, what kind of democracy is that? What kind of republic? That's terrible. That's an elitist, terrible thing. But compared to the rest of the world, it was by far the highest percentage of voting people. around,
And even the concept of voting was still recent.
Right. And so you just have to put it into context. In the 60s, to, for instance, have a black woman and a white man kissing. Right. This was the very first interracial kiss.
Oh, it was?
Yeah, on television. Now, the storyline in the TV, they had to make it involuntary. They were mind controlled.
I don't remember that.
Yeah, to kiss for the entertainment of someone who could control their minds, But it was a very, they lingered on that kiss for a while, and it was shocking.
And wait, who was it?
Uhura and Kirk.
And Kirk, okay.
And it's bizarre for me just to think about that, because now what's the big deal, right?
Although, no, but then it became about gay kisses, remember?
Yeah.
Remember like the first gay kiss on the TV show or something?
Right. What's next, do you think? The first trans person
maybe
kissing? Yeah, it seems like it's hard.
Are we done with kisses explorations?
I hope not. So
my favorite character was the Hispanic guy. You never saw him because he was down in the kitchens, but he was awesome.
Was there ever a Latino guy?
I don't think so.
Yeah. Has there ever been a Latino guy on any of the series?
I hope so. I don't know.
I don't think so.
I mean, in the future, let's be honest, in the future, there's no Latinos, so...
Right. Wait a second.
Clearly, the trend in the U.S. is less and less Hispanics, right?
Yeah, that is interesting. Yeah, I can't think of any Latino character ever. That's funny. And tragic. And horrible. Also, other episodes like The Enemy Within, where Kirk has a transporter accident, and he gets split into good Kirk, bad Kirk. And aggressive Kirk is a good leader, but he's also very aggressive, like overly aggressive and like kind of rapey, I think, as well. But then compassionate, nice Kirk is a terrible leader because he can't make a decision in a crisis. And the moral of the story is we need both our aggressive, angry, rapey side and our compassionate, passive side. And together, those things create a good leader. What do you think about that supposition, Berto?
Well, okay. I mean, I think it is evidenced in a lot of the real world, for better or for worse. I do think that leaders end up being people that can exert their opinion and their authority over others. And there are sometimes examples of leaders that do that in a very mild-mannered, laid-back way or pacifist way. But the majority seem to be of the other kind. So I don't know if it's the combination or it's more that we see both types of leaders in the real world. And
I think it's BS. One, I think it upholds the sexist paradigm and the notion that aggression is good. And there's plenty of evidence that demonstrates that you do not need to be aggressive or masculine to be effective as a leader. But that's essentially what this is saying. You can be compassionate, not aggressive, and be absolutely a good leader.
Well, I guess maybe like Picard was a great example of that, right?
Yeah, right. He didn't have an aggressive. I mean, it took a lot to push him to aggression.
Yeah, and when he did, it was like, all right, well, as we warned you,
Right. Yeah. I mean, you have to take action, and you can't just let bad things happen to you. But that's not aggression. That's logic, or that could be even compassion for your teammates, or even compassion for just society in general, or something. This idea that you need to have an element of essentially like antisocial or psychopathy in you and selfishness is, I think, irresponsible. And I loved that episode at the time because it was just so thoughtful and just thought provoking. But as an adult, I just think it justifies asshole leaders.
It's funny because if you think about the Godfather series, the first Godfather we see, Marlon Brando, he is certainly he's portrayed as a good mafia leader, but he's, not like a madman, aggressive, rapey type, right? It's like, okay, here's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna make you an offer that you can't refuse. That's my best Marlon Brando. But as you see the progression, first of all,
sounded a bit like Bill Clinton, actually.
Hey, come on, I'll make you an offer. Then he gets extinct, and then his son has to learn how to go from like the nice passive kid to like, okay, I'm gonna close the door and be an asshole.
Right. Well, the mafia, right? You have to, that the rules of the game are such that if you kill all of your rivals, then now you have more power.
Like Wall Street.
Yeah. So yeah, in the past, aggression was probably very helpful, and today I just think it's less helpful.
I disagree.
Yeah. I'm cool with you disagreeing. So also we have the prime directive. What is the prime directive in a nutshell, Berto?
That's basically anytime they go to a restaurant, the kitchen is directed to serve them prime cuts of the grass-fed beef.
Right. In a nutshell, that's what it is. More broadly, it's the directive for the Federation that when they encounter other civilizations on other worlds, that they cannot take actions that will alter their course.
That's right.
They're supposed to leave civilizations untouched, and even if it means that bad things are going to happen to those societies.
Yeah, like the volcano is going to blow up.
Right.
I know.
Like the last Star Trek
That's right.
movie, they were on a planet and a volcano was going to annihilate a primitive civilization. And they decided to break the prime directive and use science to turn off the volcano. But what they were hoping to do was to do it secretly so that the civilization wouldn't know. But then they saw the Enterprise,
right.
and now they started to worship the Enterprise. And I wonder if they're going to bring that back.
That seems like, because they lingered on the effect, the side effect.
Right.
I mean, they didn't show us the eventual side effect.
Right.
But given that in space, time gets wonky and time dilates and contracts, who knows? But you could imagine that they encounter an enemy, that it is the evolved version of these people.
Yeah.
And now it's a problem.
Right. Maybe that's this next movie. I don't know. What do you think of the previews?
The frontier pushes back. What is it? This is where the frontier pushes back. So the first preview was not well liked. And when I first saw it, the main thing I didn't like about it was that it was like spelling out, hey guys, if you like my other movies, like the Fast and the Furious, you will like this movie, and I was like, all right, I get it. But
right, it's being directed by Lin,
a
Taiwanese-born American kid, who has been working on the latter Fast and Furious movies, in addition to a whole bunch of other things.
Now, I love the Sabotage song, the Beastie Boys song.
Yeah.
But one of the complaints, and I agree with it, it's like the whole preview was centered around that song. It didn't feel very Star Trek.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a little worrisome to have a Fast and Furious guy directing a Star Trek movie, because Star Trek fans want at least a semblance of respectability, and Fast and Furious has none of that.
Right.
And it's like inviting the meathead in, he's not a meathead, but a meathead movie into an intellectual movie. And to some extent, that the downside, if you can criticize the latest J.J. Abrams produced movies, is it doesn't have a ton of intellectualism the way that the past TV shows and movies did. And so to take it further into anti-intellectualism and, special effects and crashes, and from the previews, and I'm not spoiling anything because it's all over the previews, is it looks like the Enterprise crashes again.
Yeah.
And it's like, do you need to have the Enterprise blow up in
every?
Yeah, it doesn't need to blow up every time.
You might need a different design.
Right. Or I don't know, like in the, original movies and the TV show for sure, the Enterprise, it takes some damage, and it looks like it just gets shredded in this movie. And then it looks like there's a lot of fist fighting and stuff. And although I'm confident that the actors can pull it off because I really like the interplay between these guys.
And I think it'll be entertaining.
Yeah.
I just...
it could just be like silly and it could be frivolous fun.
Yeah. Well, one of the things in retrospect, because, it was tempting to conclude from J.J. Abrams and company that their shows were very intellectual at first, because you would think when Lost first came out, it had that air about it, like, whoa, what a mystery, what a elaborately weaved thing. But in the end, when you look at in retrospect, you're like,
right,
it wasn't that intellectual. There was some mysterious things that they concocted, but that's about it. So in that sense, when you see these movies,
the way I would put it is each episode, I'm not even joking, I am sure the writers said, how can we screw with the, I mean, not, not in a mean way, but
just
how can
confuse them.
What could we possibly put on the screen that would be interesting and just mind-blowingly confusing and would cause people to wonder what that meant.
And we'll figure it out later.
And then they just stacked so many of these.
I got it. Polar bear in the jungle.
Yeah, I got it. Show the little black boy with water and he's mumbling something and he can't talk. I got it. Let's have a bunch of symbols illuminate after a door slams on someone's legs at the end of, I got it. Let's have a series of numbers that the guy had on his lottery just think of all the bullshit that they had, that they walked us through. Anyway, so back to your...
Well, so therefore, now the second preview I think did a better job, but I'm still thinking, well, it's going to be fun. But I do believe we're moving away from maybe some of that original thing that some of us liked, even of the very original show, which was like this mystery and this kind of clever curiosity about the universe and
kind of Freudian. I'm going to get into that in a second, but the original show had a pretty heavy Freudian element in it. A lot of psychological...
Right.
pain and mind control and stuff, and I'll get into that anyway. So the Prime Directive, it's basically responsible, right? And it's anti-colonialism at a time that you could say was at the height of American colonialism, right? We were colonizing Vietnam and Korea and essentially Europe and Africa and the Middle East, and we were taking over the world. And this show was like, hey, when you encounter another group of people, don't screw with them. And also a time when we were moving into other ecosystems and introducing our own elements, bringing our own things and planting them and just decimating an entire, species of plants or animal or something. And so I like this principle of the show. However, it never really worked on the show, and they were constantly breaking it.
Well, and actually, and you could kind of think that, like, okay, so how did I say this? On the one hand, we have the horrible thing that happened at the zoo the other day, where the kid fell in and they had to shoot the gorilla dead.
Yeah.
And then that makes you wonder, why do we have zoos?
Right.
Because it's not to protect the animals. Okay, now it's become a little bit about like saving some endangered species. Certainly not the way it started. It was, hey, I don't live in Africa. Can Africa come to me?
Right.
Yes, sir. And it was horrible, right? It's horrible conditions and stuff. Now it's a little better. But so there's that extreme of, you could imagine if they didn't have something like a prime directive, it's like, okay, go and get some weird creatures from all these planets and we'll make an intergalactic zoo. Right. That's definitely where it would go, at least a lot of what would happen. And in the process, introduce pathogens, decimate, like what you're saying. Now, the flip side of that is, hey, we can produce food, cure like almost every disease, and you're telling me we're not going to help these little struggling people? We don't have the time to spend like 6 months making sure that our pathogens won't, or whatever, like figuring out the science behind it, dropping a sterilized pod just with the, I don't know.
Right.
And instead, like, no interference. So I feel like it's an extreme, and because it is an extreme, it was always broken.
Yeah.
But now maybe that was a good motif for the show, though, which is like, can you live up to this extreme moral compass?
Right. And it's an ethical question.
Yeah.
Because good intentions, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Is that a saying?
Yeah, something like that.
And yeah.
It's the road to Morocco is paved with two actors that were trying to
play it again.
Their career or
play
something.
it again, Sam.
Yeah.
Also, on the show, Kirk, when he did break the prime directive, was often seen as the hero for doing so.
Yeah, right? Like, it's like, God damn it, someone's got to do something.
Right. And in the last Star Trek movie, similar kind of thing, you walk away saying it was good that they did that.
Yeah.
And, maybe there's a consequence down the line, who knows. And the other thing is it portrays the great white savior, the great white male savior, right?
Well, did you ever watch 24?
No, yeah, I watched the first season.
So eventually it gets ridiculous because no one believes Jack Bauer, even though he saved the world a billion times. But if you think about the original premise, is like the only guy that sees the truth and can possibly save everyone is Jack Bauer.
Right.
And he's going to break every rule and shoot people in the kneecaps, but it's all worth it because the ends absolutely justify the means.
Right.
When it's Jack doing it, no one else.
Right.
And Kirk had a little bit of that.
Right. And at a time in the 60s, white male privilege was at its height, maybe, and he just had that swagger to him. Now, can we say Star Trek should have completely gone against that and had a black lesbian woman who's disabled as a captain of the show?
Yes.
We could say that would have been nice, but it's the 60s and...
Well, it's the 2016s. I still don't see all those categories being represented.
Exactly. And to make a show, you have to sell it to your audience, which was primarily white back then.
I mean, if we were speaking about Fast and the Furious, right?
Yeah.
The two main actors was a white guy with blue eyes and blonde hair, and a white-looking, sort of Hispanic-ish guy.
Hispanic-ish?
Or what is he?
I don't know.
So it's another white guy.
I think he's just a big white guy.
Okay. Vin Diesel.
Vin Diesel, yeah.
Well, he's always like, I don't know.
Is he part black?
I don't know. I don't know. But my point is that those are the two, and then they have all these other token additions.
Right.
There's one Japanese guy, and there's a couple black guys, and Hispanic.
Which is, a step in the right direction.
Yeah.
But still, it's always a white guy.
Yeah, but that's the point, and it's 2016.
Right.
So it's really hard today even to see the leads not be that, let alone in the 60s.
Right. In addition, the storylines, if you watch the show, it's often... If you just think of the context of the 60s and of white male privilege and of American privilege, and how Americans thought of themselves as superior to these savage races or stupid races, or Eastern Europeans with their dumb things and the Africans with their dumb things, just American specialness, what do they call it? American exceptionalism. There's a lot of that kind of attitude of federation exceptionalism. We're always right. The other people are dumb. We know what's right. If you listen to us, things will go okay. And the old ways are bad. Our ways are good. It's always we're right. I can't think of the original series or even the other shows, really. I'm sure there's one or two, but it's frequent that the Federation, which is kind of like the United States, it's or the Western world anyway.
Right.
We're right. We have science, we have logic, we have reason, we've been through those stupid steps of the developing countries. We are developed. You have to listen to us. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Also, science was prominent on the show, which is really great. They had science officers. Spock was a main character, and they really promoted the idea of science. Whereas a movie like Star Wars, it was a lot of magic, the Force, and that's kind of thing. But let's before we get into more psychology stuff, I want to talk about Star Wars versus Star Trek. What do you think is a notable difference regarding the psychology of Star Wars versus Star Trek? What do you think?
Okay, so I feel like although in Star Wars you definitely see some teamwork here and there, there's a lot more of an individualistic approach and a hero-centered storytelling. So, and again, Captain Kirk notwithstanding, it's in Star Trek, a lot of times, like, you just can't pull through without the whole team. And someone's kind of giving the main orders. But Spock's kind of a rogue in a sense. And he's sometimes contradicting and adding his own wisdom. And then you can't do it without the engineer down there. And they're all in it together. And one's saving the other. Team. Star Wars, that happens in specific moments. But definitely a lot more about this one guy's journey. And he's special and he's got the Force.
Right. Do you know the word for the Star Trek vibe regarding that?
No.
Collectivism, you've heard before?
Oh, yeah, collectivism.
So, yeah, Star Trek...
because you collect the toys.
You collect the toys, whereas with Star Wars, like me, you had an individual toy. You just had a Luke Skywalker, while your little brother collected hundreds of them, seemingly. Star Trek was much more collective and less individualistic than Star Wars was. And when you think about it, it's very apparent, right?
Yeah.
You immediately came up with that.
Yeah.
And it's just like, oh yeah, Star Trek is about the team, and Star Wars is mostly about individual heroes. And I think that's interesting to note.
Yeah.
And also how... Well, would you say Fast and the Furious is a team effort? I would say later on it became more of a team.
So to me, the perennial and probably best example ever of a collectivist team show was the original Mission Impossible.
Really?
Because if you watch those original episodes, it's very hard to say who the star of the show is.
Interesting.
And every episode...
I guess Law and Order is kind of like that too.
Yeah, I guess you could point that out too, yeah. So I guess you could point that out.
Yeah.
And I guess I could agree with that. No, but anyway, so maybe it was a 70s thing?
Yeah.
Star Wars came out in the 70s too, though.
Yeah.
But it was a movie,
yeah,
not a TV show.
Well, I think there was a time, and maybe it's still happening now, where procedure was interesting, or they started, with Dragnet.
Yeah.
Star Trek kind of has a Dragnet quality to it sometimes, where they investigate, and there's a lot, they sit around tables and talk
and
about.
Mission Impossible is like that, and they have to describe what they kind of give you a little bit to get what they're doing.
Yeah.
And then when you see it unfold, you're like, oh, that's what those masks were for, and that's what the syringe was for.
Right. Perry Mason was kind of like that. Yeah. It's interesting to think about the past and how that was cool. And also at the time they had like cowboys and Indian movies and stuff, But and it's just funny to think now with all the special effects abilities that you have, that they don't really have so much of that anymore, but maybe they do. And again, Law and Order might be just that thing, because I haven't watched Law and Order since the original series, like in the 90s, I'm guessing. Da-da! And from my memory, it's a total procedural. Like, you got the detectives, and then you got the prosecutor, and then the defense attorney, and then the judge, and then the so-and-so, So Star Trek, in its collectivist ways, it's about humanity. It's about being a good citizen in the galaxy. It's not about, avenging your father. It's about being responsible with your power. At least it gives some thought to that, being responsible with power.
Did they feel like they had to compete later when Spock gets killed?
Right.
Khan!
Right. they were protectors of the oppressed. Star Wars is to some extent about that, but not really,
No, because let's be clear about something. The rebels, the people in charge of the rebellion, they're the elite of a different part of the
right.
Of the it's
right.
like she's a princess,
right?
Right.
In a lot of ways, the rebellion are the rich elite people. Yeah.
Because the stormtroopers are just like clones or poor people, whatever.
Right.
Sure, there's a few Empire people, but the rebels started from elite, and the robots are all oppressed.
Right. And Star Trek is also about having a skill that you can add to the team.
Oh, right.
Having a specialty. I'm the communications person. I'm the science person. I'm the doctor. I'm the weapons guy. And also about knowing your place in that team. And that's very important. Okay.
And then to be fair to Star Wars, I guess because it is a different format when you're doing a TV show and when you're doing a movie.
Right.
Just flat out.
Yeah.
So when you see the movies that came out for Star Trek, they started veering more in the direction of heroes.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And just as a side note, have you watched any of the original series episodes recently?
Of Star Trek?
Yeah.
Not too long ago, like 2 years ago, when I was watching Twilight Zone, I got interested all of a sudden in going, and I watched, what's the one with the people that are like kind of super blonde, and they're all wearing those little gowns, and
you're describing about
almost every
10 episodes.
Oh my gosh.
Do you remember liking it?
Well, I mean,
because I just
nostalgically, I guess.
Because to me, as I remember watching the original series, I think in my 20s, and still really liking it. Now at 45, maybe because I'm just too spoiled with too much other good TV. When I watch these episodes, I find myself getting bored and sometimes just a little confused about the writing. Again, they were making a weekly show. This wasn't like Game of Thrones where they have all year to write for 10 episodes. They had to make a new episode every week, and they only had the summers off. Yep. And so, and from what I understand, like the writing was done right, as on the fly, And
was it improvised?
No.
Just written on the fly.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like Gene Roddenberry had like 100 scripts fully developed when he headed into the making of the show,
I see.
And so, did you find it there? Oh, well, so I just have to admit that the original series, and I know people are going to hate me for saying this, it's not actually very entertaining to watch anymore.
What?
I loved it as a kid because what else was I going to watch? And I remember maybe it's great when you're 10, but when I'm 45, I'm watching some scenes, and Kirk bugs me in a lot of ways. The way he, Spock and Bones, the way they write those characters, I really love those characters. But sometimes the way Kirk acts, he's just so smug, or maybe Shatner's acting, I don't know, but just so, I don't know, just so arrogant and I don't know. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I mean, to me, I like them because I guess I did like that he took charge of the situation. Yeah. But
he was just so smug all the time.
Well, I got to tell you, sometimes I got annoyed by Spock because as a kid, I'm
double smug.
Why can't you just bend the rules a little bit, right?
Yeah.
I got to say probably my favorite was the doctor.
Bones, McCoy.
McCoy, yeah, because, well, first of all, my dad was a doctor, he's a psychiatrist and stuff. And so I kind of like gravitated towards like, oh, he's a doctor. But also, he seemed caught up in the middle of all this chaos, and like, he's just like the voice of reason,
Yeah.
Like, come on, guys.
Yeah.
So I always kind of liked his character.
Okay, so let's get into the classic triad of Kirk, Spock, and Bones. Mm-hmm. So you got Kirk, William Shatner, Captain James Tiberius Kirk. He represents, as you were saying earlier, the id. Right?
That's right.
Your pleasure centers, your aggression, your impulses, your animal nature.
Rawr.
Yeah. He's also kind of an ego character as well, in that he represents someone who has to make choices about what to do based on lots of different input, which is our ego or ourself. Plus, we identify with him a lot. So he's kind of the ego. He, as I said, is quite smug. He's always right. He's the leader, and he's also a womanizer, which we haven't mentioned yet.
Oh yeah, that's
but
true.
He always got the green girl, and that was part of his character.
By the way, that was another social statement.
Yeah, right. Travel to another country, have sex.
Forget interracial with black, like interracial, like interspatial,
interracial.
Yeah.
And then you got Spock, played by Leonard Nimoy, who was a wonderful singer. If you've never heard him sing, he's actually a good singer. He represents what part, if we're going on the super ego, ego spectrum? Where
it seems like the super ego, maybe.
Right. He represents a kind of particular version of the super ego.
It's almost like the maybe using a different model. Like if you weren't using just those three, it would be the completely like the mathematical part of the brain, right? Like I'm just doing math here, guys. No emotion. It's
sort of the part of the superego that is intellectual and also attempting to be non-emotional.
Right.
The character was extremely interesting, and I think it's always been, and they keep coming back to this theme with Data, with other Vulcans on all the shows, with even Odo and Deep Space Nine. They keep coming back to this theme of emotionality, the fact that you need emotions or you have emotions, and yet logic is so helpful. And if you can try to be logical, it can really benefit so many different things.
It can help it can make you smarter almost, even though you think you're smarter because you're only seeing the facts, just the facts.
Right.
But you're missing the subtleties because you don't understand the emotional content. That certainly happened in a lot of moments, especially with Data. But
right. And he represents the modern movement of science to override emotion and religion and this kind of thing.
Right.
It feels like blah, 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 but what does empirical science tell you? And this has been a movement in Western society and around the world for, a few hundred years. And Spock represents that as well. Spock also represents I believe, one thing that people don't even necessarily know is that America, particularly in the 60s, was dominated by German Americans. We had two massive, horrible world wars that have been blamed on Germany, but which basically drove all the German Americans underground to hide the fact that they were German. Instead of Schmidt, they're now Smiths or something, right?
Right.
And there was a time when the majority or the largest ethnic group in America were German Americans, which people don't know that, right? You think, it's probably English Americans or just all the various different no, Germans, massive amounts of Germans. And Germany is culturally known for its logic. Psychology to some extent emerged out of Germany and Austria, and this intellectual ability and this systematic ability. The Nazis, just to point to that, were very systematic. They wore, gray outfits because it blended into the background.
Right.
They wore helmets that didn't have adornments on it. It was just functional helmets. At a time, at the beginning of World War II and beginning of World War I too, particularly World War I, there was a lot of illogical warfare happening, right? It's like, well, we're going to write off. There were people on horses at the beginning of World War I.
Right.
And then you had Germans just mowing them down with machine guns because it's illogical to be on horses. It's more logical to use artillery and all these. Anyway, so I'm not fully versed on the anthropology and the sociology of Germans, but I hope you understand what I'm getting at, in that America was dominated in the 60s with a lot of people who were valuing, not just Germans, but other European Americans, frankly, valuing logic and downplaying irrationality and female emotions, right? If we're going to be men, we're going to be logical. But what is logic really, right? I mean, when people say to me, I can't tell you how many times someone will say to me something like, like clients of mine or students of mine will say, well, so-and-so, I got in a fight with my spouse and it's just illogical for my spouse to say these things to me. She's not being rational. And I just say, by what measure of logic do you have? Because it is logical, for instance, for your spouse to yell at you if you inadvertently hurt their feelings earlier and they're upset. And so it's logical for them to express their feelings. So there's these labels of logic that gets placed on things by, frankly, Western men, white men, that are basically just saying they don't like something, and therefore they're calling it illogical. And I think Spock did that sometimes as well.
Well, I think I've fallen victim, or not victim. I have been guilty of this many times in my life. A lot of times though, when I do it or when I have done it, it is because of a very narrow perception about what logic means in human relationships, which is oftentimes, for better or for worse, not a lot. And so, for example, let's say you and I are having a discussion about something, and it turns out that, there is a ring on the wooden table, and you're currently holding a cold beer, okay? And I'm like, Kirk, you put a ring on my wooden table. And you're like, dude, I didn't. I am very careful with that stuff. I never do. And so I'm like, you're being illogical.
Right.
And why am I saying that? Well, because I'm using, quote unquote, I am using logic to say, we are in a room, you are holding a cold beverage. Right. The only things that can put a ring here right now in this context is that. But the fact is, well, A, there's still a billion other possibilities.
Right.
B, you have just told me something about yourself that I didn't know, which is that you apparently are very careful. Now, C, it could have been you.
Right.
But we still are not going to resolve it in this way.
Right. That's a simple example, but I think illuminating to this. The real there's a thing called logic in philosophy, and there's also, you could have a spectrum between logical and illogical, or something that holds up and something that doesn't hold up, or something that's based on evidence and something that's not based on evidence, right? But you still, if you claim anyway, I won't go into it. But anyway, the Bones, DeForest Kelley, Dr. Leonard H. McCoy. His role in the Triad is often fighting with Spock because he thinks Spock is inhuman, because he is, and saying that Spock doesn't have any feelings, and McCoy's like, you never enjoy life, have a drink with me, and Spock is like, no, that's illogical, I'm not going to have a drink. And Bones is also kind of old school, and he kind of represents perhaps us today. He's an everyman, as you were saying.
Right.
And he, to some extent, also kind of represents the id and the ego in a similar way that Kirk does.
But less impulsive.
And maybe a little bit of superego as well, in that he takes care of people.
And he's very concerned about ramifications.
Right. And he's also perhaps the most feminine of the three characters, because he takes care of people, and he's a fixer instead of a destroyer, and he's also has more emotion, like the way women are often portrayed and socialized. And so you have Kirk and Spock and Bones coming together, and as Bowen said, the triangle, the threesome, is the most stable of relationships, because when there is conflict, there is always a third to diffuse that anxiety and conflict. And
are you saying that we should all be in threesome relationships?
Yes. And Kirk, Spock, Bones, threesome, when Spock and Bones are fighting, then Kirk would come in and mediate. Or when Kirk and Spock were fighting, then Bones would come in. And so they had that written into the show. And also, we could look into the psychodynamic analysis. Who are the biggest fans, particularly in the past, of Star Trek? We're talking 80s. What demographic, what sort of person in America was the most avid fan?
Yeah, I mean, probably mostly a male sub-teenager to teenager who was also into science or kind of sci-fi stuff.
Yeah. What else could you say about these people?
They probably rolled a wizard more often.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. And what else?
They were maybe. I mean, this is probably gonna land me in trouble because they were probably a little more socially awkward.
Right. like you and me to some extent.
I was not a Trekkie. I was the coolest Star Wars guy.
Right. So when certain kids grow up, they, for probably reasons related to the way their family interacts, when they enter school, they're labeled as uncool and they aren't treated as well as other kids are treated. And they're labeled nerds and all this kind of thing. And so these people develop a complex around being accepted and being liked and being powerful. They feel a little less powerful in it. They feel a little emasculated. And so when we have complexes like that, we look to internalize something unconsciously because we're trying to possess their characteristics. A teenager is insecure, so they look to find a very secure person to internalize. Justin Bieber seems very secure. I'm going to internalize him into my psyche and possess his security and his talent and his fame, and then I will be confident and well-liked and all those things. It's a fantasy. It's a defensive mechanism against the pain, the internal pain of the reality that people don't like you.
It's Ferris Bueller, Marty McFly.
Right.
Yeah.
So Kirk is a womanizer. He's in control. He's cool. He's respected. He's a captain of a ship. People have to follow his directions. He always knows what to say. And so, of course, these kids who grew up, these boys, nerds, will turn to Star Trek as an example to internalize. Spock also, because a critical part of nerddom that I've never really heard articulated is the nerd characteristic of not controlling your emotions when you're in social situations.
What do you mean?
Yeah. So the thing, because I'm victim of this at times, it's one of the things that I consider central to my nerd sort of
Nerdity.
Yeah, nerddom is when, for instance, when you and I did the episode about the Star Wars movie, episode 7.
Yeah.
We came home and we did an episode, I think the next day or something.
Yeah.
And we were high as a kite on Star Wars fever. If you listen back to that episode, it's like a review. We're reviewing episode 7. I normally try to keep it together on the podcast, except when I'm telling trolls to fuck off. And in this episode, I am embarrassingly nerdy and not controlling my emotions. Cool kids control themselves. They'll say, "Yeah, that was good."
That's a cool movie, man.
But they're not going to be like, "Oh my god, it was so good. Oh my, did you see?" And then that one part, and then, that's what nerds do. And so this is a critical, this lack of the ability to kind of control your excitement is very much a part of being a nerd, which causes you to be labeled a nerd. It causes you to do things that gets you labeled as a nerd and categorized.
Are you saying that Steve McQueen doesn't gush like that?
Oh my god! So I'm driving
this really escape from this place in my motorcycle, guys.
I'm driving this really awesome car and all around the city. Okay, Spock has no emotion at all. He is cool as a cucumber.
But he becomes uncool because he's lacking the little wink,
But with a combination of Spock, the womanizer, with Kirk and Spock,
right?
But Spock has no emotion. He has eliminated it, and again, respected, second in command, able, smart. He always knows things that other people don't know. He has, he has that power and that edge, and he also has like physical abilities to like, mind meld and the Vulcan death or the pass out pinch, or what do they call that?
The pass out pinch.
What do they call that again?
It's called the neck brace.
Vulcan
death grip, sleep pinch.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, we're getting
the kung fu grip.
Can you not post this episode?
But so when you are a nerd in high school, middle school, and you feel like, God, why did I lose my cool yesterday? And then you look at Spock and you defensively, because you're in pain internally and you have this complex around like, what is wrong with me? And you look to Spock and you worship him and you try to internalize him. Data the same way. You try to take him in and he's like, if only I could be logical like Spock. I think I remember thinking that when I was a kid. If only I could be like Spock. Think how far I could go in the world.
Right.
Think how much I could get done in the world if I just didn't have these pesky emotions in me. Another thing is that people go through traumas all the time, big and small.
Totally.
And how nice would it be if we were Spock and could suppress all that pain?
Yeah.
And just eliminate it from our lives and just be competent at our jobs and be revered for our competence rather than suffering all day long.
Right. And actually, it's interesting. Like in Star Wars, you had this dynamic too between Yoda and Luke, where Yoda is like a Spock and with pointy ears, and Luke ends up kirking it out, because it's like you're watching, you're like, oh yeah, look how relaxed he's floating the little spaceship so easily and stuff, but he's like, don't go to your friends. Yeah. There is no spoon,
Yeah.
And then Luke's like, no.
Well, that's interesting. I hadn't thought the Neo connection similar, is you have to let go of reality, which is kind of like suppressing your emotions. So I want to talk a little bit about the Spock suppression of emotion. So let's say that you could actually eliminate emotion altogether. Happiness, sadness, anger, hate, discomfort, fear. You could just really eliminate those things. Would you be like Spock, or would you be something else?
Well, one quick question. Does he feel pain?
Yeah. He can feel pain, but he wouldn't get angry about it. He would just
so
be
is it like a logical pain? Like,
I don't like that.
Oh, my leg is getting severed. I need to move it right away.
That's interesting. I think he will recognize his biological impulse to do that. But I also think he actually has the ability, a Vulcan mindfulness meditation ability to overcome pain. But anyway.
The reason I'm asking that is because so much of our human stress response is associated with the feelings that our brain experiences of physical pain, which is really fascinating because in the end, it's just a signal. It's just that the way we've evolved to process that signal is to kind of shut down a whole bunch of other mental processes,
right,
and tell ourselves consciously that we are in torture, right? But somehow
and to
Spock
to motivate you to take action,
out, go, run,
to protect
whatever.
yourself. Yeah.
And so, but in Spock's case, maybe through physical pain or emotional pain or whatever, but he's able to just sit there and be like, you're like, you're a motherfucker. Your mom did this and that, and he's just like, I don't understand. How do you know anything about my mother? It's like he's just answering, as if the words just have their direct.
Well,
so this is another question. Does he understand metaphors and is able to?
He does
ride through them.
He does. Here's what I think is there's clear evidence that all of the so-called unemotional characters on the show, including Data, have actual emotions. But they're just acting in a particular way regarding their emotions. If you have no emotions, why would you get up in the morning? Why do you even care about the Federation? Compassion is an emotion. Duty is related to emotion. you can't take out emotion from life. To me, if you really had no emotion, that's basically depression. You're numb. You don't have any thoughts. You don't have any motivation.
Well, I was about to say, so if you'll remember why they had to get the R2D2 unit instead of the other R2 unit, is because that R2 unit had a bad motivator. So in that universe, the droids need a motivator unit.
Yeah.
And without the motivator unit, they can't function.
Right.
But what you're pointing at is we're very much like this.
Right.
But it's just how you define it. If you're just thinking of emotions as like passionate pleas for things, as opposed to just like, it's time to get up today.
Right.
Why?
Yeah. The practice of trying to not act from emotion that you don't like is one way we could say Spock is. But he clearly cares. Like there's this one episode where he is stuck between a rock and another rock, and he's telling the away crew to get on the shuttle and take off and leave him behind. And he's saying, it's illogical, leave me behind. If you come back for me, we're all gonna die. And the crew decides to come back and save him, similar to the last movie.
Right.
And they save Spock and they're flying away, and then they discover they might all die because they waited and they saved Spock. And Spock is chastising them and saying, you should have left me. I told you to leave me. It's illogical that you went and got me. It's so in this moment, he's, in my book, being emotional.
Because he's saying, well, yeah, I see what you're saying.
He's disappointed, one. Two, he has compassion for their lives, and he's upset. He's angry at them.
Yeah.
He's not flailing his arms, and he's not pounding fists.
But it's funny because you're absolutely right about the upset and things like that. But you could say maybe he's pedantically upset, like, listen, the equation is very simple.
But why would you? But why would you care about that?
Because the equation.
If you truly had no emotions, you would just sit there like a rock observing the world. You know, if you're Spock and you got your foot stuck and you're observing these crew members coming to save you, you might mention to them. But even just mentioning to them requires compassion. Like, by the way, if you save me, you might all die. If you truly had no emotion, then you wouldn't care either way.
Yeah, again, it does depend on how far you define emotion. For example, let me ask you a question. Would you say that a plant has emotions?
No.
Okay, but plants do have motivating behaviors because they try to aim towards the sun.
They don't try to aim. Their biology reacts in a way.
Same thing. Like their corpus ends up doing things that proceed to extend their life.
But you need a consciousness to have emotion.
Well, oh no. Okay, well then, so there's where it gets a little tricky. So at which point does consciousness begin? Like, does an ant have emotions?
I would say, according to my definition of emotion, yes. There's no way to know.
Right.
But yeah, they probably get upset and they probably feel pleasure.
Okay, but I would say that for practical purposes, way after an ant, even maybe a lion, I would say that's an emotionless being by human standards. It doesn't mean they don't have... There's not other ways in which you can define what an emotion like actually means neurologically. I'm just saying that, look, a lion just goes about its business. Sure, if the cubs are threatened and it's its only pride or whatever the hell, maybe it springs into action, battles unemotionally, quote unquote, by human standards, because they certainly don't like... Anyways, and then the point is they go about their business, they wake up, they eat, they sleep, they eat, they sleep, they eat, they sleep.
But eating and sleeping is still motivated by emotion.
I know, but what I'm saying is I'm setting a different standard, a higher standard for what we would practically mean about emotions.
I think it's just a matter of categorization. It's not practicality you're talking about. It's a matter of categorization. You are, and Spock, and I think others, categorize emotion as basically female stuff.
No.
Like love.
No.
And crying.
No.
And that's like people will say, I'm being emotional. I'm being emotional, meaning they're crying. I think, and I think a lot of other people do, that emotion and thinking are one thing. You know?
I'm actually, but I'm not doing that. Like, if it sounds like that, that's not what I'm doing. Like, if I made a robot that could act like a feline, or meaning that level of quote unquote intellect, where it can feed itself, it can go to sleep and wake up and seek energy sources and kind of protect its limb from getting chopped off, and then we said, guys, I've done it. It's an emotional being. I think a lot of people, not necessarily scientists, but a lot of people would say that doesn't have emotions. It doesn't care about the sunrise, or it doesn't care if you're basically speaking softly or loudly, other than whether or not the ear is hurting or something. Like, what I'm saying is,
but does it care about eating?
Yeah, but again, you can
does it like to eat?
But this is why I was saying the plant example. I could define emotions all the way down to a rock if I wanted to. But I'm setting a standard just so that I can say data initially didn't have the kind of standard of emotion that I'm setting, and later developed it.
Data is a little weird and I even hesitated to include him in this discussion. But Spock, and clearly the other Vulcans that are portrayed, they have tons of emotions. And I think they would claim that they don't have emotions, they just try to suppress them.
That they have emotions, but they try to suppress them.
Right.
Yeah.
And with Spock, I think that even when he claims he's suppressing his emotion, I think it's clear that he's not. Like, when him and Bones are going back and forth and, making fun of each other, right there, it's like, if Spock were truly being logical, he probably wouldn't respond to Bones, because Bones will be saying something silly and Spock will say something clever. Why would you say something clever? There's no logic to that. And
and actually, this is interesting. If we could actually build a perfectly logical system, but if we define perfectly logical as it took in all the inputs from its surroundings and considered all the possible outcomes, first of all, such a machine is impossible because it is an infinite combinatorics problem, right? But even if you could, right, what the output would seem to an outside observer extremely random and emotional. Because what would happen is you'd have this machine, a butterfly flies past, and the machine quickly does this motion where it tweaks a rock. And you're like, what the hell? This thing's got weird issues. But it had computed physics in billions of moves ahead that turns out that by doing that, it got two more micrograms of calcium that extended its life by 2 nanoseconds 30 years from now. And that's the outcome of a perfectly logical system. But to an outside observer, by the time it gets that complex, it's not going to seem logical at all.
Right.
And so humans actually are very logic driven in their heads. It's just that the kind of logic that we're doing is so influenced by myriads of inputs and outputs.
Yeah.
So you're saying, why did he grimace? That had no logical purpose. No, actually it did in the guy's head, because he was thinking he could gain a little bit of an advantage emotionally.
But why does he care about advantage?
Because part of his other part of his brain is like, if I don't have advantage, I don't get food in 3 days. Like, it all could be reduced to very, very, very complex layers.
And on some level,
quote-unquote logic.
You have to care about something.
Yeah.
Again, if you talk to people who truly have no emotion, there are people that are like that are depressed. They wake up in the morning and they have nothing. They don't feel anything.
Yeah, but they still eat.
They don't eat.
Well, sometimes they breathe. They still breathe.
They involuntarily, because the
part of their brain is breathing.
You get my point.
I do. I totally do.
And to be truly emotionless is to be inert, because emotion is not a separate thing from human consciousness. Emotion is a way of describing consciousness, in my opinion. And, we, of course, philosophers talk about this all the time, and you and I are not necessarily versed in all the different philosophies. So to some extent, we're talking out of our ass. And as one patron said to me, ass talking is fun. So she appreciates our ass talking.
Well, I mean,
but anyway, my point is that when I watch Spock, I actually see emotion almost every time he talks.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I don't disagree that it's from the very beginning. In fact, the only thing I disagree with is the way we're using the word emotion. It can vary wildly.
Right.
That's the only thing.
Right. And so if he redefined it as I enjoy having some emotions to a certain degree and manifesting them in a particular way, but the way that some people manifest them, like you humans tend to prefer, I actually don't like that because it doesn't actually help me or those around me.
Right.
When I get angry and smash someone in the face because they bumped me, that doesn't help the greater good of humanity or of, the galaxy. And I emotionally want to make the galaxy a better place for everybody. Yeah. If he would have said that, then that would have been more accurate to me. And I think better for watchers because that would have delineated, I think, what are helpful emotions and altruistic emotions and compassionate emotions and very useful emotions as opposed to bad decision making regarding emotions.
Like you could narrow it down to stuff like this. Look, those moments where you have to make a decision and you still put your needs in the middle, and so like the decision comes out somewhat affecting you, right? Like for example, let's say you were deciding a case and you were part of the jury or maybe the judge or something, and you stand to gain in some way, well, then that's called a conflict of interest, right? But in reality, like in practice, that happens all the time, and it's very subtle. So if somehow you had the ability, because either you're a Vulcan or a robot or you've trained with meditation, whatever, if you somehow had the ability to, as much as possible, suppress any sort of bias and any sort of conflict of interest and stuff like that in your decision making, well, that would be pretty powerful.
Right.
It'd be hard to prove, and sometimes it might seem like you did and you didn't, but still, it'd be powerful.
And you would still have to be emotionally attached to particular principles that guide your behavior.
Like, in fact, including the one of, I'm going to be this way.
Right. Yeah. Because otherwise, you would either be inert or you'd be a chaotic nihilist who just kills randomly because there's no point to anything, And so...
actually, this is okay.
You'd have to have some attachment to some principle, that was guided by emotion.
I was gonna say though, like, did you read The Watchmen?
No, I did not.
Or did you watch the movie?
Yes.
Okay, so the main bad guy, Andrew Voight. Yeah. He tends to be hyper logical.
Right.
And so what happens is, from the outside looking in, you're like, well, he's a monster, right? But he'll explain to you, like, well, do the math with me, and if you follow the steps, turns out I'm not, quote unquote, a monster.
Right.
Now, but a lot of people would still say, oh, you're still a monster.
Well, there's a real life example when Eisenhower dropped the bomb. Eisenhower? No, not Eisenhower. Truman dropped the bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Today, a lot of people consider him a monster. In the media, when they talk about it, it's often portrayed as a mistake, as America being America and just stomping all over the innocent people, because Japan today is seen as this fun-loving, cutesy Sanrio fantasy land that doesn't even have its own army, which I think it does now. But anyway, but at the time, it was exactly the Watchmen dilemma, which was, if we don't drop the bomb, 10, 20, 30 times more people will die in a landing of the main island of Japan. Mostly Japanese people will die. The estimates were, I don't know, in the millions of Japanese people dying. And that was not an overestimation. The fanaticism that dominated the Japanese people during World War II dictated and was demonstrated time and again that they all fought to the death, including women and children, would commit suicide because of the disgrace or their worry that Americans would do bad things to them when they wouldn't. and their loyalty to the emperor, which was God on earth.
Yeah.
And people don't necessarily remember that. I'm a Japanese person. I obviously want to care about the Japanese people.
Yeah.
But, and I'm not going to say it was right to drop the bomb, but there was a logic to it that you cannot deny.
And so
I don't know if it was the right decision, but
so that there's an example of where like one could imagine a type of leader or person that's like more like House or Sherlock Holmes, who sits there and goes without hesitation. They say, "Mr. President, here's the deal. Blah 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 blah. We could drop a nuke or this. And that. Oh yeah, drop the nuke. Press the button."
Right.
And
so that's
to a lot of people, it seemed like, "Whoa, you got no emotions."
Right. You're logical, but that's actually a product of emotion to care about the math.
Right. It's just that for the way that people use the word, not scientists or doctors and things, the way that people use the word, definitely the common person isn't like that.
Right.
The common person, agreed, everyone is emotional. The common person wears emotions on their nose and ears and sleeves and everything. Maybe
Spock, a different word, or maybe even this is what they meant by emotion, was gut instinct in spite of yourself or something, like it's your gut instinct to not drop the bomb. But when you really think about it, it's actually a compassionate act to drop the bomb. That's the way they thought. Now, again, I'm not saying, I don't want to, listeners to start debating me on this issue, because it is complicated, and there might have been other things Truman could have done. We'll never know. But the point is we're talking about emotion versus logic, and to me, when it comes to human decision making, you can't be without emotion. Otherwise, you would act either very strangely or you wouldn't do anything at all.
Yeah, I think we just need a different word, because it wouldn't be useful for, like, if Dr. House was a real person and we were all trying to talk about him, we couldn't all say, "Oh, he's totally normal," quote unquote, because most of us would say, "Dude, that guy, he's like emotionless." But of course he's not emotionless in many definitions of the word. I think what we mean is that guy only acts on medical logic when he's making decisions about the patient. And then in reality, of course, there's more subtlety to it. But there's clearly something we're describing that is outside of the bell curve of the norm.
Right.
What would happen is most doctors would be like, "Oh, I could prescribe you this, but I probably shouldn't." So maybe one way to look at it is they can make decisions quickly without spending too much time debating
or being bogged down by social niceties.
And they take themselves out of the equation.
Yeah.
They don't stand to gain or lose, right? For the most part, and whatnot. So Vulcans seemingly exhibit this more so.
Yeah.
And Data maybe a little more so.
Right.
But to your point,
so Data clearly cared.
Yeah.
About you could say he was programmed to be that way.
No, but that's fine. Yeah. So to your point, if you meant it as literally, they feel. No, I can't even do a voice that's such a voice. There is no such thing as what they meant, like what it sounded like, right?
Right.
Vulcans clearly do care about certain things. So you don't even have to go back down to the plants examples or the lions.
Right.
Just by human standards, Vulcans cared.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Just a few last little things here. The times in the 60s were fraught with a lot of uncertainty and a lot of chaos. You had assassinations of MLK, JFK, Bobby Kennedy. There were race riots. You had Charlie Manson in the late 60s, early 70s. You had Malcolm X being rising in power, which freaked out white people, and then he was murdered. You had the Vietnam War. You had murder of Medgar Evers, nuclear weapons, Bay of Pigs, the Cuban Missile Crisis, the seemingly downfall of society, hippie movements, and like rock and roll going off the rails, and like satanic music and drugs. The 60s were a very scary time for people. To us, it looks quaint. It's like, oh yeah, Vietnam War, like big deal. But
the Wonder Years.
The Wonder Years. To people back then, it was frightening. It was terrifying.
It's very interesting. When I watched Mad Men,
Yeah.
was the first time I realized that.
Yeah.
Even though Mad Men, ironically, shows you like this like highfalutin lifestyle in New York and stuff.
Yeah.
But you see these little windows of everything that starts happening in the 60s.
Yeah.
And so I grew up in Colombia during a very turbulent time, the 80s, which was horrible, you know.
Right.
And I always thought of like America's always so stable and everything's always. But when I watched that, I was like, oh my God, imagine your president just got assassinated. Your president. The president of the United States.
Right.
And like the civil leader and then the president's brother. And then you're in a war that can't be won. And like, and so I was like, oh my God, and then the riots, like crazy riots.
Yeah, crazy riots.
So the only thing that I could come up with why maybe, well, first of all, I was in a foreign country, so it looked from the distance, the 80s in the US looked great, right?
And they were.
And they were compared to the 60s. Yeah. But even in the 60s, I think one of the things is the country is very big.
Yeah.
And so maybe that was one of the things that helped soften like the damage is because it's such a big country with so many people. Yeah. Whereas when you have some of these smaller, like Colombia is small, but there's even smaller countries that are constantly afflicted by war.
Yeah.
So imagine if Seattle was always with riots and bombs and war, and that's where you live.
Yeah.
That's like why I think some of these other places seem constantly, but the 60s were crazy.
Right. And it can't be understood by us today how scary it was. The little glimpse I have into it was in the 70s, we would, in the same way that we would have fire drills, we would have nuclear. We would have nuclear. We would have atom bomb drills by getting under our desks.
Yeah.
And imagine that, right? In the 60s, it was worse because it was just assumed that at some point the Soviets and the United States were going to bomb each other. It was just a matter of time.
And it nearly happened.
World War I happened, and then World War II happened, and of course World War III. It's just a matter of time when, and so when it happens, get under your desk and it was terrifying.
Get under your desk.
And the thing about World War III, it was very much understood that it wasn't going to be fought by soldiers in the theater of war. It was going to be essentially half the world was going to blow up. Yeah. And in the middle of Indiana, a missile would come out of the sky and annihilate you.
Yeah.
And that was in the 80s. I remember even then, it was a foregone conclusion that was going to happen. And younger people today have no idea just how terrifying that was. Today, it's like, oh, terrorism, it might hurt us, but it was nothing like complete human annihilation the way that I just assumed it would eventually happen.
Right.
And so the 60s, it had all this stuff. And so now Star Trek comes along where we've fast forwarded the VHS tape to 2250 or whatever. We survived. We had World War III and we got through it. And look at, we're all getting...
is that in the backstory of Star Trek?
I think they have a war in there. I think they refer to like World War III in the 80s or 90s or something. Then they had the Clone Wars, right? With Wrath of Khan or something.
There were Clone Wars?
Yeah, they had the clone... Oh my God, all the people are going to hate us. But anyway, yeah, like they created Wrath of Khan guy in the past to fight. Anyway, the point is and then they froze them and they went out into this.
We should have an episode about Star Trek sometime.
Yeah. And so in the 60s, right in smack in the middle, 66, 69, there's a show where it says we got through it, not only as a country, but as a planet.
Yeah.
And look how far we've come and look how logical we are. And we have science behind us and we're exploring the galaxy. Right. We're not just exploiting. We're actually just altruistically exploring. We've eliminated money. Everyone's happy. Disease has been eliminated. Let's look at where we're headed. Logic and cooperation and everything got us there. And it was an escape, and it provided a fantasy for us. It's a it's a defense mechanism to fall into fantasy when we're in pain.
Right.
And as a country, the Western world, we were in pain, we were terrified, and we fell into this fantasy, maybe even the reruns in the 70s as well, as a way of escaping that pain. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Also, last two defense mechanisms that I can identify that were highly present in the Star Trek original series was displacement. We hated bullies as children, all of us. We also hated the Soviets, and we also hated brown people. No offense, Berto and me. And the Klingons provided a race of people we could displace our anger onto safely. We can't openly be racist against Asians or against black people or Hispanics, but the Klingons,
We can hate the Klingons.
we can hate the Klingons because they're baddies. They're in space and they don't even exist. And so we hated minorities, we hated bullies, we hated Soviets, and so Klingons were a good target for the displacement of our anger and our rage. And then regression. For many children in the 1960s, watching the show provided a comforting regression back to, for kids that grew up in the 60s, they watched the show. And then in the 80s, 90s, and beyond, they can rewatch that show or even watch the other iterations as a way of regressing to an earlier time. Like when you started watching old Twilight Zone episodes, you might have been trying to regress to comfort yourself. There's nothing wrong with regression. There's nothing wrong with displacement or internalization. It's just noticeable that you might have been suffering at the time and trying to return to a more comforting, more dependent
Twilight Zone.
Yeah.
Talk about a way to regress.
Right. Or Star Trek. But when we return to these old things of nostalgia, it could be a clue that we're actually suffering interpersonally at our job and our marriage, in life. And it's okay to regress if that helps, but perhaps looking at the broader picture of our lives and wondering, is there another more direct way that I can assuage my stress? Maybe by going to my spouse or going to my boss or whatever.
Are you saying that when I watch Flintstones in diapers, is that regression?
Goo goo gaga. That does it for another episode of Psychology in Seattle. Again, if you listen to this entire episode and I made a mistake, which I know I know that I did, and you feel like commenting on it, sandwich it in between about 9 or 10 compliments, and then I will be okay with it. Anything short of that, again, you can fuck off. Thanks for joining us out there. Please take care of yourself because
live long and prosper.